Hi there, and a warm welcome of sorts to this Digital Foundry Direct Weekly. This is the 237th edition. It's our weekly show where we discuss the latest gaming and technology news. Let's crack on by talking to our panel. Hello, John Linneman.
Yes, Rich. It's good to be here today. I had to bring that back, of course.
Yep.
Yes, we do have some interesting things to talk about today, including a very big reveal of something we've been working on in the background, which will be coming up very shortly.
Excellent stuff. And of course, Alex Battaglia.
Yeah, hello there, audience, and Rich and John. And I saw a comment last week that someone was complaining that I haven't changed my background in a while. I don't know what that was about, but I thought I would add a 7800 GT. Just, like...
Because why not?
Right there. How's that sound?
I mean, it's got nothing on the Radeon 7, Alex, but it'll do.
Yep.
Sorry. I still see that. I see that little red corner over there, Rich. Don't think I don't see that every week.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and with that fascinating content for our audience, let's crack on with our first news topic. Okay, so we're actually recording this first news story out of sequence because we weren't invited to any pre-embargo events, but Halo is back. The remake is en route. And we've now seen some first actual footage of it. Lots to go through on this one. It's definitely Unreal Engine 5 based, and it's definitely a remake. It's campaign only. It's campaign evolved. John, what do you make of it?
Wow, man, this is there's a lot of emotions running on this one for me. Halo is a very special game. It basically defined my entire college career games-wise. I spent so much time playing Halo. So, when I see this, I see a lot of amazing things, but I also see a lot of things that I can nitpick. But I feel like the job that they were faced with, sort of remaking something like this, is pretty massive because it's so ingrained in people's memories. But the first thing I will say is this is a gigantic leap visually, stylistically over the original sort of whatever it was called, the remaster, I guess they did.
The one that's made by Saber?
Anniversary edition.
Yeah.
Yes, I never liked how Anniversary edition looked. This comes far closer to matching the look and feel of the original Halo, but with modern technology. So I'm liking what they're doing here. But unfortunately, there's I guess if we have to talk about some nitpicks, it really comes down to we've reached this point now where there is now complete global saturation of Unreal Engine 5, and you just instantly see all the Unreal Engine 5 things popping out. I know Alex is itching at the trigger there to to talk about this because there's a lot of issues, but it's still early. So before we get into that, I just wanted to set up the fact that I do think it overall looks pretty good. So that much is good. But then you see all the noise, the fizzle, the micro traversal stutters, the lumen issues. It's just, plus the low resolution, all of which we'll talk about here in a moment. And you just kind of see those limitations sticking out in a sore thumb, if you will. And in that sense, even though it's technically superior, it's almost hard for me to say if I think this looks that much better than what they did with Halo 2 Anniversary some years ago, which is objectively technically behind this. Of course, it's many years older, but I feel like it held up the visual style without as many visible compromises. You know what I mean? Alex, why don't you talk about your thoughts on this? Because I feel like you have a lot to say here.
Yeah, I won't talk about the art. I actually do think the artistic rendition here is interesting in its own right, and it's a hard job to get such a classic game looking like this. But Unreal Engine 5 here, man, if sometimes we see pre-release trailers for games, and I don't want to say too much negative about them, because we know that things are work in progress, but I think this is not launching too far into the future. And some of the stuff you saw.
Well, actually, I mean, if it's going to be an anniversary, it's a year out because the 25th anniversary of Combat Evolved is a year out.
Yeah.
But all we know is that the game is going to arrive in 2026. It's all bets are off as to when it's actually going to arrive. But surely it would make sense to do this on the 25th anniversary unless they just don't really want to do that. They want to get the game out there quicker, and something else is happening on the 25th.
Yeah, but the basic gist of it, though, is that some of those things in there, I don't think are actually going to be. You can't fix them for release because they're kind of ingrained. Just with the amount of things, like how often have we seen like just an Unreal Engine 5 game, like we're like worried about it before launch, and then we see stuff and like, it's actually more or less the same at launch, right? So like that's okay. So when I see them in a trailer that's supposed to like be hype inducing, it is hype deflating a little bit. Just to call out a couple of things. Well, one, I can only presume this is some console footage of some device, because the resolution that you can see it almost right in the initial intro of the trailer, just not by the grain breakup of everything, but like when the Pelican is shooting at the ground, like the tracers are just full aliases, and they count to like 800p-ish or so.
So real quick, Alex, I do at least want to applaud them. If this is indeed console footage, I think it's great to show console footage like this at an early state, right? Like, even if it's not perfect, that's kind of like a rare move, I feel, in this space.
Yeah.
So that's cool. That's cool. I think it's cool.
Yeah, especially for them, where they kind of nebulously threw out PC footage for so long with the original Halo Infinite's reveals, if you recall that. So that is more applaud. We can applaud that, but the visual results are there for sure. Issues, software lumen is throughout this entire trailer. It's a little bit awkward looking on distant geometry, with like a lot of the splotchiness and the kind of disappearing lighting that is occurring, as well as the water. That Halo 1's water was amazing looking at the time, and here you can see a lot of SSR on it when the camera's moving around and whatnot, which it's a little weird to say the least.
Typical, though, of software lumen reflection, though.
Yeah. And then the last bit really is the traversal stutter. John described them earlier as like smaller, but my goodness, for me, they're huge. There's a specific scene that I'm thinking about. So like when you go across the beachhead on Silent Cartographer, you go into the first Forerunner structure, and there what it can do is later, after you beat later part of the level, it enters you can enter the substructure of Silent Cartographer's map. And there it loads in the original game too, not like a load, but it loads the level at that point when you go underneath. And here in this footage, every single time at around like the 3 minutes, 40 second mark there and thereafter for about, I don't know, maybe like 45 seconds long, the Master Chief is fighting all the Covenant in the hallway, leading down into this darker structure. And every single time he crosses there's like a line in the middle of the room. There's got to be like it's got to be like a 80 millisecond stutter there every single time he goes back and forth between it multiple times during the trailer. That's just one instance of it, but it actually happens all throughout the island here. And I mean, maybe I'll have to go back and look at the original Xbox footage of this original game, but I don't think the original game had traversal stutter. It did have checkpoint load stutter.
It had checkpoint load stutter.
Yeah.
But let's not pretend like Halo 1 ran great, though.
No, but like
but it targeted 30 FPS, but
I feel like Microsoft
stutter-wise though.
Stutter-wise, Microsoft, as well as 343, it's just
343 doesn't exist anymore, bud.
The Halo Studio. I feel like
there you go.
There we go. I feel like if I would love to see someone try and solve this issue in an Unreal Engine game that we see shipping, and I was hoping it could be them, but this footage doesn't. I don't have great confidence that it'll be solved for the.
It's going to be the coalition, Alex. Let's be honest.
Yeah, it'll probably.
I think they won't have this issue.
Yeah, but those things really stuck out to me technically in the trailer, and we can talk about the rest. But like every single time one happened, like my brain shuts off and like my heart sinks, and it's like, oh, okay.
Well, where do you want to go next, John?
So I did want to talk a little bit about like sort of the way it's changed, though, because it is, it goes from combat to campaign evolved, but there is actually some gameplay differences I noticed right away. First of all, they sort of functionally changed some things about the way the Warthog works, I guess to bring it more in line with the later games. They talked about the third seat, which I think is funny and fun because I guess you can play it in 4-player co-op now online, and they actually have split screen, by the way, which is great for 2-player co-op at least. So everybody can ride in the Warthog. But I also noticed there's that early part where you have to like go up the mountain road in order to flip a switch eventually. And in the demo, the 13-minute demo, they're actually able to drive the Warthog up there naturally. Now, of course, in Halo, you could accomplish anything you wanted in the original Halo in terms of getting the Warthog where it was not supposed to be. But the way the map was originally designed, it was definitely not intended to go up there, if I recall. So that's different. They also show like one of the Covenant elites try to jump on the Warthog itself and interact with it directly, which was, again, that was more of a Halo 2 style feature. So that's kind of neat to see there as well. So, it's clear that they're actually trying to add some things to it. They also said during the presentation that there's going to be 3 new missions in the game. And it's going to be sort of a prequel to the events of Halo. So it's not going to change the story of the original game, but I actually think it's really great that they're going to add some extra stuff to it. And I'm curious to see how that ends up playing and like if they feel like complete proper Halo missions. But obviously at the beginning of Halo, they unseal the casket, I guess you could say. So I'm curious, like, so how are they gonna how is all this explained? Like, how far back are they gonna go? Like, I'm curious to see all that. It is funny watching this, though. I'm watching the footage now. I mentioned how the Warthog can go up to that area, but it also made me think, like, wait, if the Warthog goes up there, there's like a cliff overlook there outside of where you flip that button to open the door deeper into the island. It's like, if you have the Warthog up there, like, what do you do? I guess just leave it up there, or do you just drive it off? Interesting. I like the way the new weapons look. I think they did a good job there. You still get the bonobo face on the back of the pistol, which is great. If you know what I'm talking about, Alex. I see that laugh. It's still there. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on here that I'm excited for, and I love revisiting this. And also, Halo's campaign is the first game that I played all the way through with my son some years ago in co-op. And so I also have, beyond the college years, I have memories there as well. So I'm really excited to play through this again, looking like this. And yeah, I mean, it's just, with these sort of remakes, it's always just fun to see how things have changed because the original still exists. And it's fun to be able to, so it's not like it existing is a problem necessarily. But I just wish that the technical things could be solved or improved. Like you look at, and maybe the bar is too high for this, but you look at, like, say, what Blue Point always does, right? Like, the Demon Souls remake, for instance, is, like, almost technically faultless. Like, you can take issue with any other art stuff, but, like, the execution was perfect in terms of just, like, technically delivering what they wanted to set out. There's, like, no stutter, no dips. It looks amazing. That's kind of what I wanted to see here, and instead we're just... It's still exhibiting these Unreal Engine-ish issues.
I don't know. I'm interested here because, well, first of all, the very nature of a remake means that you will never please everybody.
Yeah, never.
It's just an impossibility to do that. Do you think the actual way that they've chosen to tackle the aesthetic of the game is a good one? I mean, I don't have any particular issues with it.
I think it's overall good. I have tiny nitpicks like the color of the grass and stuff like that, like really small stuff, right? But like, I feel like the overall vision of what they're doing here is actually very faithful, and it sort of recreates the feeling of that original, but with new graphics in a way that absolutely was not the case with the Anniversary Edition, which I thought was just like kind of garish and ugly. The only thing I will say about Halo, though, is, and this is, Halo's map design and scale is almost a product of its time, where it had these like big, massive spaces, but like they didn't have a lot of actual granular detail in the terrain and these large flat surfaces. And even though aesthetically, it looks older, it actually kind of defined the way those missions felt, and it gave it this starkness that I feel like is absent here. Once you when you fill the terrain with tons and tons of detail, it really does change something about the way that vibe feels in the mission, I must say.
It's going to be interesting to see how stuff like Assault on the Control Room looks, which is like a weird ice valley with nothing on the sides. Like, I don't even know how you translate that into Unreal Engine 5 stupendous detail. I like John, I think I'm like 80% there with the art decisions behind this. I think it's really hard to go back. Like, the first game, they worked within the technical limitations they had at the time to deliver something that was inspiring. But as soon as you tack on things that the first game didn't do at all in any way, it's just going to necessarily change some of the art there in ways that, there's little control over that if you want to have the game have a certain level of fidelity. And not everyone's going to be on board with that, and I think that's perfectly fine. Thankfully, the original game still exists in a form, at least in the MCC, as well as you can find copies of the original elsewhere. So the original game is at least not going away. I actually do like a little bit that they're focusing on the campaign, because I really loved the campaign in the original Halo. I know a lot of people talk about Halo LAN parties, which were also a big deal at the time. But, actually I found like the co-op campaign one of the most like memorable things, playing with my brothers there.
I mean, that was a huge thing, the campaign.
Yeah.
It was excellent. People complain about the library, of course, and I understand these complaints, but I maintain the library is actually not bad.
It's a nice break of pace in a game that is.
And let's not forget, the introduction of the Flood, I still think was one of the most masterful things I had seen in a game at the time. Just in how they were able to conceal that, and the whole reveal of it, like the whole nature of the game changing so dramatically halfway through. Like that was pretty insane to do that at the time. Like nobody really expected that. And I thought it was awesome.
For sure.
Yeah. I was just reading the IGN article about this in the search for more detail, because there was an event in Seattle where they could actually play the game and ask some questions to the developers. And it does, they are talking about focusing on the campaign and pointedly focusing on the 25th anniversary. That 25th anniversary is November next year. So, maybe there is still a lot of development time to go on it. Going back to the Unreal Engine stuff, it's obvious that we can already see that, the resolution is low. It's visibly low, which has a lot of ramifications for all of the effects in there. But also, it's quite interesting. When you're in an internal area, it's just a flawless 60 frames per second. But then you go outside and it suddenly gets quite choppy. And, it does say that this is obviously non-final footage, and we could be a fair way out. But, Unreal Engine 5 at 60 frames per second on a Series X or a PlayStation 5 is actually going to be very, very tricky to do, which does sort of concern me about it. But as you say, John, I mean, it's a fair dues to the developers here for actually showing console footage, because they could have just powered past. I mean, all of the critiques that we've got, or a great many of them, they could have just powered past by just sticking a 5090 and running the PC version. So, kudos to the developers for doing that. Obviously this is going to come on PlayStation, just kind of, and they're saying it's going to be day and date, which basically sort of solidifies the new direction I think that Microsoft is going in at this point. Obviously we have at this point seen Forza running on PlayStation hardware, which is very much signaling a statement of intent there, but it wasn't day and date. And they've obviously been quite guarded about putting their biggest games day and date on PlayStation,
right.
But this is going to be day and date seemingly. But any final thoughts, Alex, before we wrap this up?
I'm coming at this with an open mind. The studio's history is obviously very tumultuous. So this is kind of maybe like a fresher, cleaner break for them. But at the same time, going back and trotting out, it's an anniversary, of course. But, at the same time as them going back and kind of remaking the old game, I would have been curious to see what they would have done to bring the series in its current iteration forward in a sequel, or in a reboot, or in who knows what.
Right.
But, so the remake's here. But I'm excited to see how it turns out, specifically technically, for sure.
How do you feel about this versus Halo Infinite's tech?
Well, I was a notorious not a fan of Halo Infinite's tech. So I don't know. I'd lament the loss at least of a custom engine in the video game sphere. So I'm both happy that I see like some better artistic choices this time around, but also sad that we don't see it in their own engine doing those things.
Right.
Well, John, let me put that question to you in a different form.
Yeah.
Original Halo Infinite reveal, engine-driven reveal trailer versus what we're seeing here.
Well, I mean, technically this is certainly superior in terms of what it's doing, but in terms of like stroking those emotional chords, I think that Infinite original trailer kind of trumps this easily, just in terms of like, see that actually promised a future that never came to pass, where it felt like a game that was really going back to the roots of Halo and going to do something really special and interesting. And they just didn't get there with it, as we know. The ball was dropped so hard with Halo Infinite. Beyond the game itself, just the inability to hit launch, which I think is the energy they needed going into the launch of Xbox Series. And I genuinely think that was the turning point for where we are today with the brand. Like, it's weird to put all that on a single game, but I genuinely think that was it. They needed to get that right, and they didn't. And that's a shame. So, but hey, I do have one more question for you, Rich. Is Halo your favorite Beyonce song?
I've never really considered it. I've never really ranked them internally. It's up there, though. It's definitely top 3.
Good. Just making sure.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. I'd love to see a Halo reveal trailer
scored by Beyonce.
Beyonce soundtrack. that would be quite something, wouldn't it? A bold new vision from Master Chief. Cortana could be Beyonce herself.
Oh my gosh!
Don't give them ideas, Rich.
Well, they're re-recording on the lines, so there's still time.
Yeah. What is the decision behind that exactly? The re-recording of lines.
I think it's because they want to, because they're doing. It's a remake, right? So the original lines may not fit 1-to-1 with what they're doing, especially with the new cutscenes, which are all redone. And the fact that they wanted to do those 3 new missions. So
they're going to need some anyway.
And everything.
Yeah.
So I think if they just had new lines for those and then they mixed with the old ones, it would be a bit weird. So it makes sense to record everything new so that it all feels more cohesive.
It does. Yeah.
Okay. Good stuff. Okay. Well, with that, let's move on. Okay, then. In an interview with Mashable, Sarah Bond from Xbox has revealed, basically confirming, really, that the next generation console from Xbox, from Microsoft, it is happening, of course. But they're saying, well, here's the quote. Well, I can tell you're right, that the next-gen console is going to be very premium, very high-end, curated experience. You're starting to see some of the thinking that we have in this handheld, but I don't want to give it all away. We'll be talking about that second comment shortly, but it's the concept of a premium, very high-end, curated experience that has perhaps raised some eyebrows, and I think it's pretty obvious that this console is going to be pricey relative to what we've seen before, but perhaps not relative to the market for Xbox consoles as we're seeing them at the moment. Alex, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I actually like the word curated there as a sign of things to come, because in the console market, it is far smaller in terms of, I would say, the vast amount of stuff that appears on it in comparison to if you look at Steam. What you're given there on a PC is not at all curated. You just load up a game and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it has graphical settings and maybe, all these other things. But a curated experience to me seems like there will be this large market of things you can do on this Xbox, but they themselves are going to have some sort of front end, some sort of curated aspect of it where they pick the best, have guidelines, etc., but it still is kind of an open market, like a curated wine list or something like that. I'm just thinking about. And in the end, I think that is what their next Xbox is. It's a lot more hands off for how much can go into it, like in terms of things you can do on it. But they will have, in the end, some guiding hand saying, this is what you should possibly do. This is the best way to use it. And that'll be their Xbox Microsoft Store probably, which will have hopefully the fastest UI, the most responsive UI, and the best feature set of all the things you can put on this Xbox. But that is a whole other question that we'll probably be talking about later in the show at some point. But to me, this does point to the fact that the next Xbox is basically a PC, but with a curated front-end interface.
Mm-hmm. Okay. John, the premium side of this seems to have upset a lot of people. The concept, I mean, there's talk now of $1,000 console when previously Phil Spencer has ruled out $1,000 console for not being able to increase the size of the audience. However, this machine would have been in development for some years now, where presumably they'd have been aware right from the very beginning that the silicon that they're going to be creating is going to be quite expensive to make. What do you make of all of this?
I mean, we knew it was going to be more than 4 games as well, right? So I wouldn't, read too much into that. But clearly, I mean, this is where they're going, I think. And this is kind of what we thought that they were going to be doing over the last year or so, which is essentially pivoting towards bringing the PC into the living room, which is the original goal I think they had with the first Xbox before the actual Xbox development team really took the reins and made sure it wasn't just a Windows PC in the home. But we're now at the point where that seems to be something that's a little more viable. People do indeed use PCs in their living room, but I do think this is essentially the end of the era of traditional Xbox as we know it. And I think they are just essentially combining their Windows business and their gaming business to create a singular platform here. And since it will essentially be a gaming PC, you would expect that it's going to have to offer a certain level of performance to be compelling on the TV side. I think on a handheld, you can get away with a lot less. But if you want to actually have a box that's genuinely compelling for PC gamers, it's going to have to be X amount of power, shall we say, right? Mm-hmm. And there is something compelling to this whole idea of offering a box that can play PC games in a neat package with a smooth interface, right? Because that is something that is still kind of lacking, I would say, there's a big asterisk on that, asterisk on that because, well, it's not exactly been Microsoft's big forte so far, because when I say that PCs haven't worked well in the living room, it's because of Windows, right? Where this idea is like you plug in a console, you hit power, it comes up on your TV, and you're just able to pick up a controller and start going. There's no fussing around with anything. PCs are still not like this, right? Especially if you don't have the mouse and keyboard in front of you. And that's clearly what they want to build. And we know that can work, but I think the Xbox Ally is essentially the model that they're going to be going for. And I guess I should hope that by the time they launch something like this, whatever they've been trying to do with the Ally and the front end there, and that is a partner product, of course, hopefully that will actually lead to something better, because right now I think their biggest challenge is making Windows something that people want to use on a TV. Because Windows kind of sucks right now in a lot of ways.
Right, yeah. I mean, we're going to have 2 separate news topics about the concept of, first of all, the premium curated experience, and then secondly, this comment about how the Ally is essentially a preview or a hint of what's to come. But I think we should just roll it into one discussion here. It just kind of makes sense, really.
Agreed.
So on the expense side, I think if the objective is basically to make Xbox proliferate across as many devices as possible, then they've kind of moved the strategy on from a mainstream box that is affordable that will increase the sort of available market towards a high-end flagship device that is actually going to act as a kind of, the best of the best for what Xbox is, and you'll pay extra for that. And if you don't want to pay extra, then there's this proliferation of other devices, including PlayStation, of course, where you can actually play those games. And secondly, there's also the concept of cross-gen. Cross-gen isn't going to go away. It's going to be probably a longer period than before, which I think is quite sad in many, many ways. But it does mean that however many hundreds of millions of existing devices that are out there, they'll still be viable for a lot of these games for several years to come, by the look of it. The concept of a high price, I've said it before, I'll say it again. If it's a concept of expensive compared to a console, that's one thing. Expensive compared to a pre-built PC, that's another. Which kind of leads us on to this supporter question from Spud 19870. Hello, Digital Foundry team. It seems to be a given that Microsoft are going after the pre-built PC market. Do we anticipate a price point of £800 to £1,000? Looking at the specs of pre-built PCs currently, you can get a Ryzen 7 5700X and a 5060 with 16 gigs of RAM for around £1,000. Do we anticipate similar specs, or do we think Microsoft will take a hit in the traditional console fashion and potentially spec higher than this to provide more value when compared to the current pre-built market? So my view on that is pretty straightforward, because they can basically just go to AMD for a single chip or a single SoC rather. They can actually undercut the existing pre-built market quite significantly, I think. Yes. So again, it will be expensive if you're comparing against a PlayStation 5, possibly even a PlayStation 6, right? But compared to pre-built PCs, it's actually going to be potentially a quite decent value. I think that's probably the way I see that. Yeah,
I see that similarly too, but just look like a modern motherboard. Do you think you need 4 PCIe slots on a next-gen Xbox-like PC? Do you need 6 to 8 USBs, 2 Ethernet ports, or all these these are things that just console people who are interested in just gaming don't care about. And it would be interesting to actually have a motherboard made that is basically all about an SoC. And I think that's how they're going to save the money on it and undercut it. But at the same point, because you don't have those other features, you actually are losing a bit of the modability or modularity of a normal PC, of course. That is, unless they offer multiple SKUs of whatever this thing is, like different memory configurations, different SoC configs, right?
I think that would be a bad idea.
I agree. They need something more monolithic. But
on the memory side of things, I think it would be. I think they can actually customize that SoC because they've got that bridging technology between a CPU chiplet and a GPU chiplet. They could just have another GPU chiplet that's smaller, but it would still be quite expensive to make, I'd say, relatively.
I was going to say, Alex, I think the big benefit, though, to going non-modular like a typical PC just comes down to being able to make a more visually compelling box for your living room, because I do think that matters. I don't think just having a PC tower plopped in your living room is good. Most people aren't cool with that. I'm not cool with that. I don't like the way that looks. It's too big. It's just not, it doesn't really work great. Being able to have something that's a reasonably powerful PC that actually looks more like a console and feels really well crafted, that's pretty compelling, actually, I think, in many setups. And I think that's the two things they need to get right. They need to get something that's actually really beautiful as a design, where you're like, oh man, this looks great. This is a nice box that fits nicely into my setup, unlike a PC. And they need to make sure that the actual user experience is way better than just a pre-built PC in terms of the front-end interface. If they can get those two things right, I think they will have actually a fairly compelling product, but I don't believe that they are going to be playing in the same pool as Nintendo and Sony from this point on. Like, this is a different class of product. They are not competing in that console market as far as based on what we know so far, I would say. And I don't think they're expecting that anymore.
Yeah, that sort of segues seamlessly into this question from Eggs for Days. Hi DF, exclamation point regarding Microsoft's next quote-unquote console. All I want is a device next to my TV that looks good, runs PC games, and also runs my Xbox library. I don't mind paying a premium for that if I get PC-like value. What are the odds of getting such a device? Would such a device be possible architecturally and licensing-wise? Keep up the great work! ! Well, I think definitely possible. Almost certainly the play here. I'm not sure what the licensing has got to do with it. That should be okay. And also, you will be able to run your PC games. I think that's the bottom line. This question here from Paul Arbequina. Hello, DF crew, ! Another week and yet another round of Xbox news to cover. Can they not have an off week? Yeah, it's a fairly good question. My question is simple regarding the rumored PC Xbox. Why would someone that only wants to play games on their couch, traditionally known as a console user, want to pay extra money for a Windows operating system they will never use? Surely Microsoft won't give it for free. I don't think they're doing it for the ROG Ally X, and add more money on top of that if Microsoft doesn't want to subsidize the hardware itself. I don't think they do want to subsidize the hardware, but the idea of paying extra for the Windows operating system is that basically you can then tap into Steam, Epic Game Store, all of that, which is just kind of a really good thing, I think.
Seems
Alex?
pretty easy. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, as John was saying, it seems pretty easy. I think this is only a good thing if you're a user, but why would a user who traditionally just wanted those simple walled, I don't think about it kind of things, like, oh, I'll just pay for whatever I have on your digital store? I don't know how much those people who've only ever done that branch out. I couldn't possibly speak for them because I've never been them, but I think maybe it could be like a translation market. You've seen it before where people use one medium and they switch to another. We all switched from CDs to primarily streaming music, a lot of people. So people are capable of changing their habits of media consumption and media use. It's just a matter of whether or not Microsoft is making a compelling medium for the TV that'll make users switch without worrying about too much stuff. Totally has yet to be proven, and we'll talk about it later. Maybe it's a little bit hard to believe that they'll be able to achieve it.
Yeah. Let's move on to this topic of how Xbox Ally X represents some of the thinking that we have for the next generation console. Because I think there's a lot of reservations here. I mean, obviously, this is pure speculation because we don't actually know what Microsoft's strategy is for it. But I think, the overall sort of direction of travel is to unify everything under Windows, which, kind of makes sense, right? But on the flip side, there are profound problems here because it's not a great place to game at the moment. Got this question from Ishraq. If we are getting a PC like Xbox next generation, do we have any faith in Microsoft to get Windows ready with a console interface that works in a similar way to SteamOS? Personally, given Microsoft's track records on this, games Windows Live, Windows 10 UWP apps that crash if you look at them funny, the Microsoft Store, and the mess that is the Xbox app, I have my doubts. I think there's two things here. Basically, the discussion point is basically concept and execution. The execution of the Windows app and the Xbox app is currently a bit sort of substandard. I actually had a quick catch-up call with Jason Ronald from Xbox this week, and he kind of sort of acknowledged that what we're seeing on the Ally X is the beginning of the journey. There's a long, long way to go, but Alex, on the one hand, we're talking about a curated experience, which is great because that is console-like and it does sort of reduce friction for more mainstream gamers. But on the other hand, we do have this situation where Windows is not great.
Yeah,
John's been complaining about Windows this week. The Direct last week was delayed because the ROG Ally benchmarks. I had the original ROG Ally benchmarks. There was just a mysterious drop in performance for no apparent reason. I had to do a complete reset and rebench. And the concept of that happening on my Xbox console would be horrific. So what do you think about the concept here and the execution of how they're going to do this?
Wow. Well, like Ishraq, hello, by the way, I have my intense doubts whether or not Microsoft can pull this off. So I use PCs all the time, obviously, for my work and for play. And for play, I'm primarily using Steam, and I am avoiding the Xbox Store, as well as anything that boots from the Xbox Games folder. I've had it many times in the past where games that boot from the Xbox Games folder have different versions and different behavior than the things that are brought out on Steam or on Epic Games Store. They're quite often missing features that are not there. They interact sometimes differently with Windows HDR. They may be a different game version, and they may get updates at different times than the Steam version, which pretty much always has priority for any third-party release. So I do not have a super positive interaction with the Xbox interface. Just this week, I even posted a social media message about, hey, wait a minute, what happened to I can't see how quick my games are downloading on the Xbox app anymore. What's that about? And everyone's like, oh, it just disappeared. Like, oh, why is it like everyone knew like, oh, it disappeared at some point? I don't know. So that's all stuff that if Steam stopped displaying how stuff was downloading, like when Steam has issues, like, I don't know, we just have like such a higher standard for it, like that when they mess up, everyone's like really pissed off. But with Xbox, you just kind of, at least Microsoft's movement in the PC space, you just kind of expect poor quality and a lack of a responsive UI, and you just kind of tend to get it. So that's the thing that they cannot have. They cannot be living that legacy with whatever this next Xbox is. And I have yet to, like, given what happened with UWP and UWA, and given what happened with Windows 8, and I'm trying to think of some other initiatives.
NWO,
like Games for Windows
brother.
Lives. Yeah, NWO too. And yeah, when you have basically this history of them setting up a number of ventures to make inroads into PC gaming, but then kind of missing the boat and missing out on things that other people tend to do better, like Steam, then I don't have the greatest confidence of it. And I think some of the aspirational stuff that we saw with DX12 is relevant there. On a technical side, this has nothing to do with the store or the user interface, but I would say DX12 beyond DXR has led to, in general, at times, worse user experiences than what we had under DX11, primarily due to developers having to do so much that they didn't do before and having to take care of all these shaders that they didn't have to do before. If they were willing to let that system exist from like 2015-ish to around 2025, 2026, which was kind of a Wild West, generally bunch of crap put out there that was awful. If they're willing to let that happen to the PC marketplace for so long, like, I don't know. I don't have a great high confidence in them to do anything really great going forward on the technical side even. But I guess this is where advanced shader delivery comes in, and we have to see how that evolves. And maybe the Xbox Ally here is our first tasting point for it, and we're just going to have to look and see how that evolves there.
So there was a cavalcade of failures there, but at the same time, we're kind of overlooking the fact that the Xbox setup is actually really good. The console setup,
yeah,
sure. The whole virtual machine stuff that they've got there is actually very, very clever. Would prevent all of the stuff that we're talking about, or that I talked about previously with the ROG Ally. The question is whether that's going to persist into the next generation. It kind of, I'd say there's doubts over that. Which I find a bit problematic. But at the same time, we are seeing some really interesting stuff. Advanced shader delivery. Worth clarifying, actually, last week we suggested it wasn't in the launch Xbox Ally, and it actually is. However, it is only applicable to games that are downloaded from the Xbox Store.
Oh, you mean like an actual Xbox right now?
Yeah.
Somewhat, yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, I mean, so you do have this. That's the thing that kind of sort of concerns me. It's, and I hope it's not the case that they're binning off the whole concepts and the stuff that really, really worked on Xbox and was rock solid for years in favor of a system where there are problems and unreliability. I mean, you've had issues this week, John. In fact, you wanted to do a direct topic about it but it was so kind of niche that
No,
maybe not. But at the same time, it does indicate that wild, crazy things just happen on Windows rather for no reason.
Yeah, I've grown increasingly frustrated with Windows 11 over the past year. I've always been like, you know what, Windows is fine. I don't mind the user interface. I think it looks nice enough. But Microsoft, man, I don't know what it is, but it's just been, for me, it's been a string of bad times because they keep breaking somewhat niche things, but things that not always niche, but they can really cause problems. So like earlier this year, I had issues with like flashing on monitors when using HDR a certain way with multiple monitors, and it's like, oh well, you just got to unplug the one monitor. It's like, well, I don't want to unplug it. I'm using dual monitors for a reason. And I couldn't essentially use my PC the way I wanted for like a couple months until they eventually figured that out. And of course you run through the usual stuff. Oh, is it the graphics card? No. Test different graphics card, test different drivers. Nope, not that. No, this is just a Windows bug. Reinstalling Windows doesn't fix it. It's a problem there. Then I started having issues with like when you would toggle HDR, all of a sudden it would just like the PC wouldn't actually seize up, but like they would stop updating the UI. So the UI would freeze effectively if you turn on HDR. So you'd unplug the monitor, plug it back in, and then everything's back. That was extremely annoying for about a month, and then they fixed that too. And again, that was not the graphics card's fault. That was something they did in one of their stupid Windows updates that just suddenly made using HDR way more difficult than it used to be. And again, a hassle. And then most recently, like in like the September updates, they broke the way HDCP and DRM is handled in Windows, and it was causing blackouts and like drop signals, and things would come back, but like it's this huge disruption. So like I found out now, they partially fixed it for some things, but services like Apple Music, which I use regularly for listening to music if I want to, I mix it up. Sometimes I listen to CDs, but when I'm on my PC, I like to throw on Apple Music and just like stream stuff, and it's a good place. It's an easy interface to use it. Well, it's broken right now because if you start it up, it triggers this DRM thing, which then causes the Windows update, causes the monitors to black out for about like 30 seconds, and then they come back, but then it just randomly blacks out while you're using it as long as the app's open. Oh, but what if you don't use the app? Okay, well, what if I start up Apple Music in Chrome? Guess what? Same thing. Anything that triggers DRM causes this issue. And it's like, it just makes you want to like smash my PC sometimes. And like, I thought about this recently. Like 3 or 4 years ago, I switched my dad to like a Mac Mini. He used to call me almost weekly with tech problems on his Windows PCs. He hasn't had a single tech problem since getting that Mac. It just goes. Like I've seen how many tabs he has open, and it's frankly absurd. It should be illegal, but it doesn't break. It works. I switched my wife to a MacBook this year, and all those problems and troubles and annoyances, they just gone. She doesn't complain about any issues. There's nothing popping up. And it's not necessarily user fault. It's just Windows doing Windows things. Microsoft updating it. Things break. It gets weird. Things that worked before suddenly don't work anymore. You don't have any idea why. Like even for myself, you open up the Xbox app. Sometimes, like I've had periods where the Xbox app on my PC just doesn't work. And you've got to like restore things and go through a bunch of hoops to get it to work again. Sometimes you fix it. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you're reinstalling Windows. Like the degree to which things can just break on Windows is maddening. It's so bad, and I've grown to hate Windows 11. So for just normal like browsing and stuff, I'm using Mac or Linux now, and it's way more stable on way less powerful hardware. Like why does like a 4 or 5 year old M1 Mac Pro run way the heck better than a significantly more powerful PC laptop that absolutely destroys it in terms of like the on paper specs, yet the experience sucks because of Windows, and now the trackpad doesn't work right, you need to reinstall this driver, and then oh wait, there's a problem here, there's a problem there. It's constant, and I frankly am sick of it. Xbox doesn't have these types of issues to this degree at all. The Xbox console, while it has its issues occasionally, it's been really darn solid, I think, especially the series consoles. So like all the things you're saying about the Ally, it's making like, I listened to that and I listened to what you said about it, and it's like, oh my God, it's happening again. It's the same stuff. Like you had to refresh the darn thing because it just randomly started to run slow. Like this is the stuff that happens with Windows 11. They need to fix this. They can't release an expensive console and say, yeah, okay, it's Windows 11. It's probably going to break in a week. Like, it's not cool. It's not going to work. They have to fix this. And I think they know this, but Windows, it has it has the same problem that Adobe has. I will say it's this legacy support, which is both its strength and its greatest weakness. And it's become so bloated and so full of junk over the years to the point where there's like multiple iterations of like OS elements that are like doubled and tripled up. If you know where to look, that's just like hanging on. All this legacy stuff is just jammed in there. And again, Adobe, same way. It's slow, bloated, it breaks. It's like there's something seriously wrong with these. Microsoft is a very wealthy company. Like, I'm sorry, they've got to fix this. They've got to get better at this. Like, Windows has never been worse. I'd rather use Windows Me at this point.
Well, let's not get carried away.
All right, maybe let's not get carried away.
As someone who's recently used Windows Me,
maybe that's too far.
But I agree with John, and but I'm just going to come at this from a slightly different angle, where I also have I've had some hardware related things with Windows in the last year, but also one of the things that I've disliked that I'm pretty sure wouldn't happen on an Xbox is that when Windows updates, it likes to want to rearrange itself again.
Oh, yeah.
Into some better I can advertise to you form.
It loves it.
And it loves to always, like every single time there's an update, you get that like, oh, you're like installing Windows for the first time screen. Do you want to give us all of everything on your PC and upload it to our cloud? No. Do you want to use OneDrive? No. Do you want to make Bing your default browser in everything?
Copilot.
These are like core configuration things for your PC and how it's used and how it functions. But imagine every Xbox update, like rearranging like your dashboard and getting rid of everything you had and saying, no, you have to launch your game through this thing now. Like these are things that I think that didn't happen on Windows XP. They didn't happen on Vista. I don't think they even happened so much so on Windows 7. It was really around that Windows 8 period when it started to get more into this direction of services. And these are things that I don't think will go away from Windows actually for the foreseeable future, given the current leadership. But I think it would be nice to, as a part of this Xbox initiative, have the ability to set up a version of Windows that really strips away all this junk. If they're willing to do that for the Xbox Ally, and we'll see how that evolves over time, because right now it's looking a lot more like a new front end and not so different back end. But I would like, if they're going to make a version of the OS that doesn't have all this crap in it, well, I would actually want it for a standard PC in many ways, because I'm pretty tired of having all this added in stuff on a PC that I might just possibly use for gaming, and I don't want to use for AI productivity or whatever. Like, not at all. No. Anti that. No. So that's my little rant add on to John's.
Alex, I think it's pretty clear that the Xbox team probably knows all this stuff all too well.
Sure.
I doubt they want any of that stuff in there or want to deal with these problems, but that's just like, this is where we're at now.
Yeah, I do think it is very, very early days here. And obviously, I think the comment about a curated experience is a welcome one, because, the kind of Wild West of Windows can't really just be ported over to a console lock stock and whatever. So, yes, I mean, hopes are high that things will be addressed here. It's just the concept of Windows as a foundation for it, as opposed to kind of like, I guess, it's still a version of Windows that's running on Xbox right now, but, it's all contained, it's all streamlined, and there are enhancements specific for that hardware. It's just, I think there's still some sort of, certainly from my perspective, concerns following, the arrival of the Ally X. And, you load it up, and the first thing you see is the Windows 11 onboarding experience. which has, to be fair, a lot in common with the Xbox One, but it's just presented in a way that's not great. And then, you go into the actual console after the onboarding, and you still need to do Windows updates in the traditional way. You still need to do in a separate app, in the Asus app, firmware updates and driver updates. I mean, how's all that going to work? That's not great either. So, there's so much that needs to be addressed here. And it's difficult because at the same time, you actually see an example of how this could all actually work, and it's called SteamOS. And so again, for SteamOS to be like getting on for, well, certainly in its Steam Deck iteration and, the offshoots like Bonsai, etc. It all started 3 years ago, and here we are with a new Xbox console launch with the Ally X, and it's still got all of the problems that SteamOS actually addressed. That's the crazy thing there.
Just hope they can solve this, because the conceptually this is all awesome.
Yeah,
right.
It's just a matter of making it work. And
yeah.
and if they can get it to work, this could be amazing. At least like you said, you're talking to Jason, he's like, hey, this is just the beginning. And hopefully that does actually translate into them figuring something out before launching something like this.
Yep. Okay, well, enough ranting. I did enjoy your rant there, John, by the way. It was, I'm just kind of thinking of how Emperor Palpatine could seduce you to the dark side of the Force. Sounds like Windows 11. He installs Windows 11 on your PC, job done.
Nothing subtle about that, Darth Sidious.
Okay, let's move on to our next news topic. Okay, so for this one, I'm just going to hand over to John.
Yes, we have a special segment here this week because I want to announce something very special. Obviously, we've been doing DF Direct Weekly here for a while now, and I think it's been going really well. I know we all love doing it, but thanks to our newfound independence, it's sort of given us a chance to do something else, a little different. Take a shot at this from a different angle, specifically the retro angle. So obviously, one of the things that I want to achieve here with this new, sort of newfound ownership of Digital Foundry is to sort of go a little bigger with the DF Retro stuff, do more of it again, bring more people in. And that includes doing, finally, an actual podcast. We're calling it the DF Retro Super Show. Those with keen memories might recall the reference there, but yes, we are going for it, and it's going to be a bi-weekly show where we talk about all things retro with a sort of a focus on the technology, much like the main series. It's going to be a video podcast and a proper audio podcast on all your favorite services, just like DF Direct Weekly. But we're going to be inserting all kinds of cool stuff in there, captured footage from games. We're going to get into lots of stuff. It's going to be cool, I hope. That's the plan. It's launching very, very soon, in just a week or so. But I wanted to introduce the cast to you all, because this is actually an idea that we had 5 years ago. It's almost been 10 years for DF Retro in general, but 5 years ago, we thought about doing an actual podcast, and I had 3 people in mind to join me to create this show. First of all, I want to introduce, of course, who else would you expect this? It's Audie Surly.
It's a novel concept for old dudes talking retro games on a podcast. We'll make it work somehow, but here we are.
Yes, never been done before. It's the first time. Retro podcast. Hopefully ours, though, is a little different, and takes. We're just trying to exist here in this space. We've recorded our first episode, which is going to go live soon, right? And I think we had a good time doing it, right? Also coming in, we have. And this is actually going to be the man editing the show. It's Corey Carlson from My Life in Gaming.
I'm very excited to be going on this journey with you guys. This is going to be so much fun. We've been thinking about it for so long that it's finally amazing to see it come to fruition.
I know, it's been forever. We've recorded episodes in the past and it never actually happened, but now is the time. 68,000 Heart is on fire. We're ready to go. Of course, we can't just have Corey. We also had to bring in Mark Triforce Duddleson.
Hey, I might have never met Audie if it wasn't for the concept of us all doing a podcast together. That kind of was the genesis of this, like 5-6 years ago. You're like, hey, I know this guy from Norway who I think, like, you know, you, me, and Corey, we should do a podcast together with him. And we're finally actually able to kick it off, thanks to, you know, what DF has become as a fully independent organization.
Yes, everybody is joined together, the power of friendship. And of course, a lot of this actually is made possible because of the knowledge we gained from doing DF Direct Weekly, basically, because none of us had done anything like this before. And I think we found something that we like doing, and people do seem to mostly enjoy it. So I'm really happy about that and very thankful, actually. And Audie was there kind of help getting that initial DF Directly Weekly off the ground. So of course I wanted him on this show. But one of the other things we want to do that's a little different than DF Direct Weekly, though, is that we're going to have guests from time to time. People join us on here to talk about topics that they're very well suited for. And we actually have one in the works right now that should be pretty interesting. So look forward to that. But us four, we're the main guys on this show, on this bi-weekly podcast, and we're going to give it our all. And the basic format is this. Let me lay it out. We're going to be doing a bit of news each week, like we do in DF Direct Weekly, but then we're also going to explore a much larger, broader sort of topic. And that's what we've done on this first episode in a very big way. We'd also like to do listener mail, but we're going to separate that out as its own thing because it's less timely than the more like up-to-date topics that we get on DF Direct Weekly. So that's the current plan. And we actually have even more ideas beyond that, but we want to focus on getting this done right. So I'm so happy to have you guys along for the ride here. And let's get ready for launch coming in just about a week or so, let's just say. I don't know when this is running, but that's the target. So look out for it soon. It's the DF Retro Super Show. Get excited. Now, let's get back to DF Direct Weekly.
Okay, so this is really, really exciting stuff, right? And it's the sort of thing that we were talking about in our original independence announcement video there. It's actually just brilliant to be able to action all of this stuff and, you know, because we know it's a good thing to do and we know the community are going to love it. But yeah, much more to be talking about with regards to our future plans soon. But for now, let's move on to our next news topic. Okay then, so this week Nvidia released a brand new technical demonstration that's highlighting a lot of great new technologies. Alex, you've taken a look at this Bonsai demo. Tell us all about it.
Yes, this demo was released earlier this week, and it is running on the Nvidia branch Unreal Engine 5.6.1. It is a showcase of usual DLSS technologies, multi-frame generation, transformer model, ray reconstruction, but probably the most important aspect of it, since it is running on Unreal Engine 5, is that it's going to be using RTX mega geometry, path tracing, as they say in the little blurb, with nanite meshes. And we've talked about it on the channel a couple times before, as well as when I saw that Zora demo at CES earlier this year. And right now, when you load up a game that uses hardware Lumen on Unreal Engine 5, you'll notice a lot of shortcuts have to be taken for that to work. The geometry that is being traced against is quite a bit lower fidelity than the rest of the world, the real world, the nanite world, and that'll lead to issues specifically in reflections, and it makes it so that you cannot use ray tracing for any direct lighting scenarios without visible issues popping up. And this demo has a mode to allow you to see what that looks like. So according to the demo, they say it's path traced. I don't know exactly what they specifically mean by that. Obviously, the direct lighting is path traced and the indirect lighting is, based upon a number of the features visible in the demo. But it's hard to know if primary visibility is. And that's... I kind of want to say yes and no at the same time, mainly no, but at least the lighting is done that way. So let's get into it. So you're looking at this demo that's probably been looping for a while now, depending upon how Oliver edits this video. But you'll see some pretty cool stuff. You'll see some really high fidelity geometry. You'll see pixel perfect direct shadows, really wonderful reflections, mirror reflections that have a lot going on in them, where you can see the whole detail of the world, including its indirect lighting, as well as transparent shadows, which are pretty rare to see in games. Colored shadows, transmission shadows, where, light goes through stained glass, and on the other side, you see the color of that tinting the shadow. Really cool stuff you don't see in games too often. And there's probably some other smaller effects in there that I don't talk about. But basically, it represents the highest end state of the art of a lot of ray trace visuals or path trace visuals we see in games. And the big part of this is it's working while the camera is moving around the scene, zooming in and out, and changing the active level of detail in the geometric mesh. So that's using nanite. Now, I created this side-by-side that Oliver has here and hopefully is on screen right now, where you can see on the left-hand side, RTX Mega Geometry is off. And on the right-hand side, it is on, and it's using the debug view here, where you can see the amount of triangle faces. There's some missing stuff in this view. I think it's a little bit buggy in this demo. There's stuff that should be there that isn't there, and there's some flickering. But what you'll basically see, especially on the large tree asset, is that the amount of geometry present in the ray trace view, which we're seeing here, is dramatically higher. And it's also not ever changing because the camera distance is kind of flatter in this demo, but you'll see that it does change. You'll see blocks of the geometry changing over time with this demo, and it maintains a very high degree of geometric density the entire time. Only some objects are a little bit lower poly, like the water in the demo, which seems to be done by another technique that doesn't show up in the geometry view here. That's really cool. And that's kind of the big part of RTX Mega Geometry, is making sure that we can now actively change the geometry in the BVH structure without having to constantly rebuild the entire BVH bottom to top. And that is what it allows. And I've talked about it in multiple videos in the past, and it's good to see working in this demo. The demo also allows you to show this RTX off, Mega Geometry off, and RTX Mega Geometry on, with the actual rendering taking place, not just the debug geometric view. And that looks like this here. And they'll look similar, I think, with a passing glance. But you'll notice that there's actually kind of really big rendering issues on the left-hand side here. You basically have, since all the direct lighting is using that low resolution, low detail geometry that normal hardware lumen would use, then you see things like things are missing shadows completely. Everything in a reflection looks wrong. The shadows that you do get have the incorrect, I don't know how to say it, have the incorrect silhouette on them. Usually very blocky silhouette that doesn't make any sense. Stuff like that. Why right now nanite is only really geared towards the rasterization path, but with something like RTX Mega Geometry, it becomes much more possible to leverage it in the ray tracing path. But that is with the caveat. This demo here, I don't have any performance numbers, but it's, mainly just above 60 FPS at 4K DLSS performance mode on an RTX 5090, which has been running on this entire time. I mean, it's a bit above that, but, not too much above it. And that shows the fact that, yes, RTX Mega Geometry makes this possible, whereas before it was completely impossible. But you're still having to ray trace so much geometry, like way more than a standard game would necessarily have. And that comes with its own price. So the nature of path tracing things in UE5 is still, I would say, nascent, and is still geared for super high end GPU performance. So that's interesting when you think about the next gen Xbox or the next gen PlayStation, where they'll have to achieve quite an incredible leap in performance over the current really rudimentary ray tracing support there that they have right now to make, as they've already said in multiple interviews, path tracing, like Mark Cerny saying path tracing for next gen. Well, path tracing UE5 title is currently even with state of the art hardware and APIs, very expensive. So we're going to have to see what that looks like when we get to those next gen consoles. But yeah, a pretty cool demo. I also made a little bonus footage here of the game, this demo running with ray reconstruction on and off, and you can see the differences from that. But it's a pretty cool demo, and I love that it looks, as John said, like an early 2000s demo, just like some random flyby of cool lighting effects that you've never seen before in games. Whoa. Yeah.
It's like a dreamy landscape, just floating somewhere that's, self-contained. Yeah, no, this looks amazing. I especially, though, I love how they're trying to do glass caustics there.
Yeah.
With
They're
that.
very cool.
It's not perfect, but it looks freaking good. That's just not something we really ever see in games, so I'm happy to see it on top of everything else that the demo's showing.
Yeah. One other thing I like is if you look in the mirror reflections, you'll see that they actually have transparencies in reflections. Most games just don't ever trace transparent. So you're doing that's why when they say like the light transport here is path traced, it definitely is based upon behavior like that.
Yeah.
But whether or not the primary visibility geometry is, I don't know. I don't want to say so because you can turn off RTX mega geometry and the world doesn't look like crap. It's just the lighting that looks like crap. So, yeah.
What are the actual logistics of a developer using the Nvidia fork of Unreal Engine? Does it require a huge move away from the existing basic vanilla one?
I mean, it's as long as it's up to date, it shouldn't be such a big deal. If you're already on 5.6 or whatever, then moving over to the Nvidia branch won't be like wholly breaking of everything because it's adding on features that typically don't touch any of the normal stuff. You just flip other stuff on adjacent to it in addendum or supplementary to it. And as a result, that may break your art though, because you designed it around Lumen or designed it around VSMs, and all of a sudden those systems aren't in use anymore. But I would say if you were using like an older version of Unreal or whatever, and you wanted to go up to the latest NVRTX branch, you'd probably go through all those growing pains and more that you would have of updating normal Unreal anyway.
Okay, good stuff. I mean,
we're 60% of the way there, baby, to Unreal Engine 6.
Yes.
It's 5.6, it's coming.
Yeah, 5.7. Just a little small thing. There's been some news in the background, and I've seen it too, that and this is totally adjacent, but it's Unreal related, and I swear it's good. But they're adding a lower end non-Lumen based RTGI into Unreal Engine 5. And it's been added in the background. It's based upon irradiance field probes. It kind of reminds me a little bit of what we saw in Doom of the Dark Ages and Indiana Jones. And this is targeting, as they said, mid-spec PCs, and a certain handheld console. I think we can all guess what that is. I think it's going to be Switch 2. And because Switch 2 probably cannot run base Lumen very, very well. And this new, I don't have any footage of it because it's just literally released yesterday to a development branch of Unreal. But this could be very good for all those console games where people really complain about the image quality of UE5 games, as well as a lower spec mode that doesn't just have tons of, temporal instability like lower end Lumen settings can possibly have, but at the cost of reflection quality as well as fine grain light bounce that you would get with Lumen. So that's something I just wanted to add at the end of this. It's semi-unrelated, but Unreal Engine 5 is actually, while this is like the top end of Unreal Engine 5, like how far it can go in the future, they're also right now adding in a lower end feature from Epic's side to make it so that it scales to lower end hardware more gracefully.
Okay, brilliant stuff. Thanks, Alex. Let's move on to our next news topic. Right then, so we've just put out a video that Tom and myself collaborated on, which was looking at the power saver mode for the PlayStation 5, and interesting stuff there in terms of basically cutting power consumption on the console by half, and still retaining, basically a properly current gen experience, albeit with some necessary compromises, right? There's also been speculation which we probably would fed with that video, that some of the techniques that we're seeing here may well move across to how game developers will port their existing PlayStation 5 titles onto the upcoming PlayStation handheld, the rumored PlayStation handheld, but I think we're pretty convinced at this point that it is actually happening. We looked at Demon Souls, and we looked at Days Gone Remastered, two very, very different implementations of the power saver mode there. And literally, when we finished the video, Death Stranding and Death Stranding 2 received power saver changes too. And, Kojima Productions know what they're doing. We really wanted to see what they're up to with power saver. So we looked at it. And here we are. Two very different implementations, actually. But before we actually go into depth on those particular games, a quick update on what Power Saver mode is actually doing to the hardware. Essentially, it seems to be cutting the CPU resources down in half from 8 cores, 16 threads to what I believe is effectively 4 core and 8 threads. That's quite significant. We also have memory bandwidth halved. GPU clocks reduced, potentially CPU clocks reduced as well. So there's a lot going on there. But Death Stranding, let's look at Death Stranding 1 first of all. This one, I guess, was probably quite easy for Kojima Productions to do because it is fundamentally based on a port of a PlayStation 4 game. So the good news here is that they've retained 60 frames per second. It is still a 60 frames per second game. And it looks like the only real change that has been made has been a reduction in resolution from 1800p 60 to 1440p 60. Yes, you do notice that it is slightly coarser, certainly for viewing from close range. But, it's Death Stranding at 60 frames per second using half the power ultimately. I think this is a pretty good, intelligent way to make use of that reduced specification. Death Stranding 2, however, obviously was built up with the PlayStation 5 in mind. So there's been some more noticeable cutbacks. Obviously, in all cases, we're still running at half power, so we're sort of in the 100-watt territory here. But what's actually happening with Death Stranding 2 is that you are capped to 30 frames per second now. So in theory, then, on the face of it, it looks like we're looking at the performance mode just running at 30 frames per second. That's the sort of initial takeaway. However, there are actually some more subtle changes. Tom actually looked into this for me this morning because I didn't have the time. But yes, the tessellation, the geometry on the terrain there is actually in line with the quality mode, with the 30 FPS quality mode. The reductions for the performance mode are not there in the power saver mode, so you are getting a bit of extra fidelity there. And the performance mode's ambient occlusion is used. The other thing is that while resolution is still 1440p, there does seem to be dynamic resolution that's that's more noticeable, assuming that it's actually a new feature. Tom pegged it from 1296p to 1440p. I guess talking to you guys about this, I mean, you'd have seen, or probably you wouldn't have seen at this point, Tom's video. But I guess there's a question really about the amount of effort that's going into basically reducing the capabilities of your console. The actual take-up from users, I suspect, is going to be close to zero, because why would you buy a piece of hardware and then make it visibly less performant? And the fact is, maybe you're saving 100 watts in consumption, but that doesn't actually make any real impact to your electricity bill. And, that kind of makes you wonder as to why they're doing it. But then at the same time, there is all of this handheld conjecture, which kind of makes sense, right? Because if there is a new handheld coming that is going to be running PlayStation 5 titles, there has to be a route to, basically allow developers to perhaps trial the kind of reductions that they're going to need to be doing on that kind of handheld. I'm going to go to you first, John, on this. What do you make of all of this?
Well, I mean, it's, as you say, it's an interesting sort of thing. And I guess all along we've kind of been theorizing that it was representing some sort of a push towards this rumored handheld device, right? And I think what we're seeing here is not necessarily that specifically, as in the mode implemented here is not for that handheld, but perhaps it does sort of like prepare developers for a certain level of expected flexibility required to get their titles to run on lower spec hardware to make them more scalable, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because what, like you say, the savings you would gain from this seem relatively negligible, to the point where I just don't see the point in implementing something like this unless there really was other work going on in the background and somebody say, oh wait, we can actually do this as well, and they're like, okay, let's implement that, as sort of a bonus feature, because asking developers to go back into their games just to support power saving, it seems like a big ask for not a lot of gain necessarily. I don't know. That's kind of my feeling on it. Like, this by itself isn't that interesting, but what it means about scalability in these games is perhaps the bigger thing.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The thing that I'd like to point out, and I did say this in Tom's video, is that there is a real seriously concerted effort from Sony on this, to the point where obviously the hardware is reconfigured by the firmware to actually run at these reduced capabilities. Secondly, on the software side, on the development side, before PowerSaver came along, there were 2 devices specified for PlayStation development. There was the base PlayStation 5 and then Infinity mode, which is basically the Pro mode. But now there is this 3rd device class, which doesn't actually have a bespoke device, but it is set up as a 3rd device, which is PowerSaver mode. Kind of crazy the amount of effort that's going into this for a mode which, it's not exactly going to see a lot of take up, I don't think, Alex. I mean, what do you think about all of this?
Oh, well, I'm just imagining like your survivalist person living in Alaska who only has 2 hours of solar daylight for their panels to work. They're loving this mode. But everyone else, I mean, but like John, I think maybe this is just asking developers to go look at their engine. Specifically, the Death Stranding 2 example is much more interesting than the first one, because they felt that they couldn't meet a 60 FPS standard at that wattage and at that CPU constraint, probably. And I think that's interesting because, they would have maybe then dropped the res to 1080p if it was a GPU issue. But I imagine maybe it's less than having the threads, because they already only had access to 7 anyway. I don't like 7 hardware threads, and then 13, or how many was it?
You basically had the equivalent of 6.5 cores. I think. There is system reservations for 2 of the threads on PowerSaver mode, but it's only like 10%. So there's a lot going on there as well.
Yeah. Wow. They must be. Yeah.
Paring back significantly. Yeah.
That is even more interesting. I don't know. That throws a wrench in a little bit of what I wanted to say in that aspect, because I was wondering.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's all right. But it's interesting. I guess then it's maybe prepping developers for essentially, can you bring this down into a lower power envelope and create already at least a frame rate target for that? The resolutions here chosen don't seem like anything that would make sense on a handheld device. So I feel like that is, if maybe there's a second profile hidden that we don't see right now as users.
Exactly.
So that maybe there's the performance profile that unlocks when you use it on your PlayStation, whatever handheld. But yeah, at this moment, it is a lot of effort and a whole new thing to do. And asking developers to go back into all these, like, they went back into Demon Souls, right? Like, that game hasn't been touched since the PlayStation launch almost. Like, you got like that PlayStation 5 Pro mode a little bit.
Yeah, there was pro support, so I'm assuming it would have been updated to the latest development environments, which would have, again, enabled the addition of the PowerSaver.
Yeah. I feel, just in general, though, I feel like one thing that Microsoft has done a little bit better, and maybe with the PS6, it's going to start being this way more so, is that future compatibility is built more into the system interface than it is into the specific SDK needing to be updated for each and every game build. You can kind of see that with some games, and I feel like I'm just thinking about if this mode has to be added in specifically for a future console, that makes sense. But it would also be great if there were already like PlayStation 6 modes being added into games. You know what I mean?
So going back to the handheld thing, I think there's some interesting hints that maybe there is sort of prep work being made for developers to ease the transition onto supporting the handheld. But at the same time, there's things here that just don't add up. Right. 115 watts power consumption, for example. Even if it's a different, much smaller chip, that's a lot of power reduction required to get to the sort of 15 to 25 watts you typically see with a handheld, right? That doesn't really make sense. Secondly, pretty much all of the titles we've seen so far have been running at very high resolutions, 1440p effectively, although Days Gone actually had a DRS 4K mode, which I don't see that happening on a handheld. Maybe if there's like a docked mode similar to Switch 2, maybe. The other thing which we have to sort of consider is that the new handheld will be using a completely different generation of RDNA graphics. It's going to be using, I would suspect, everything that Mark Cerny was talking about with AMD in that disclosure a couple of weeks ago. So, the GPU side of things is going to need to be refactored. I suspect that stuff like PSSR, the next generation PSSR, is probably going to have a lot more to say in terms of rendering resolutions on that handheld, which obviously you won't be seeing on the power saver mode because PSSR is completely disabled there, even if you're running on Pro. So, I think there are some interesting sort of direction of travel, so to speak, in supporting a much lower end device. But I don't think you should be looking at this and saying, wow, this is what Death Stranding 2 is going to look like on a handheld. I think it's too premature to be saying that. Comparable results, maybe at a lower resolution, I think interesting. I think the other thing that's quite interesting about this is that PlayStation didn't come to market with a lower end device like Xbox did with the Series S. I'd consider the power saver mode here as almost like a kind of Series S Elite. It's obviously
Series S Pro, yeah.
Series S Pro.
So yeah, it's interesting that this sort of appears towards the end of a generation for reasons which, on the face of it, are laudable, environmentally friendly reasons, but is a huge amount of effort for a mode which realistically probably isn't going to be seeing a lot of use. But interesting nonetheless. The other thing we haven't seen yet, and as I said in Tom's video, Unreal Engine 5 games, how they're going to scale into power saver mode, and ray tracing as well. So, if they bring Marvel's Spider-Man 2 into power saver territory, how's that going to work? Because that game was arted up to work with arty reflections right from the get-go. Shorn of those reflections, I mean, why would you run it? That would be an interesting thing to see happen. Ghost of Yotei, that apparently has a power saver mode coming, but I guess that would just be derived from the non-ray traced version. Kind of makes sense, right? We'll be keeping an eye on power saver. I suspect maybe we're putting too much emphasis on this whole handheld angle, but there does seem to be something to it, bearing in mind the amount of effort that Sony's put into this so far. But with that, let's move on to our next news topic. Interesting and perhaps depressing news to emerge from Press Engine, which, and I'll just quote the Video Games Chronicle news story here, is a popular PR tool used by developers and publishers to distribute codes and press releases to a global database of journalists and content creators. Again, quoting VGC, according to Press Engine, more than 600 journalists who regularly covered video games at major outlets around the world have disappeared from their database in the last 12 months. And the same number happened 12 months before that. And if you factor in freelancers and part-timers, then that actually increases to 4,000 people who have left games media since October 2023. According to, again, the Press Engine stuff, tier one publications that cover games, the global pool of game journalists declined 25% in 2 years. And the vast majority of these departures were from specialist game sites like IGN, Polygon, or GameSpot. Mm-hmm. Obviously, contraction in the business isn't great news. At the same time, though, there was a massive expansion during COVID. And, along with the industry itself, things have contracted since then. It's very depressing to see so many people just exit this area of the market, our area of the market. But at the same time, from my experience working with, these major, huge websites, the philosophy that drives them is ultimately that they are answerable to shareholders. And those shareholders demand their revenues and their profits, right? So that's kind of why this is happening. And it's also one of the reasons why I wanted to take Digital Foundry away from that. Because ultimately, if the video games industry is contracting, there's fewer games, then, that's going to have a knock-on effect on what we do, which we cannot predict. Therefore, we can sort of mitigate to remain profitable, but I'm not going to be setting, revenue or profit demands on the team, because we're entirely beholden to what's happening in an industry we don't control. And we're also publishing on YouTube, which is a platform over which we have no control whatsoever. So, that's kind of like why I wanted to go independent, simply because certain expectations which larger companies have, just aren't really a good fit for a small team like us. But John, I'm curious what you make about all of this. It is depressing reading, really, but kind of understandable, I guess.
Yeah, I do think it's understandable, especially having seen what it's like on the inside of those bigger companies. I think it's a confluence of factors. Firstly, I think just the nature of the way people consume media has changed. There's less interest in the written word, unfortunately. And, the whole pivot to video thing really happened. People do like videos. But even there, you have a sizable enough audience that enjoys longer form content, but the way people consume stuff these days is largely like social media driven and soundbite driven, like short little clippets, TikTok style videos, as well as like social media posts. Like the large numbers consume that kind of thing, right? And that's kind of hard to target. In addition, of course, we have the whole AI stuff coming in. So like we're reaching a point where the types of like money making things like guides, for instance, and some of the other like basic things people might write about, AI can either do it or like field the queries essentially for people. Although obviously if there's less of that stuff actually being written, then the AI has less stuff to pull from. And it is funny because like sometimes if I'm working on an embargoed game or something, I just like pull up, dabble around in AI just to see like, all right, so what does the AI know about this game versus what I've just learned? And the answer is nothing. Like it just writes very confident sounding stuff that has no basis on anything. Right? Because it can't possibly know. That information is not available for the AI to have scraped. So it can't do it. But there's a lot of things that it can do. And that's also an issue. In addition, the upper management of these bigger outlets, especially like, they want growth, often unreasonable. They don't really care about the subject at hand. They're just trying to follow trends and, make the money where they can with those trends. And the type of work that a lot of these people are doing just doesn't really fit into that anymore. And so it is getting small. But I feel like this type of industry has had its ups and downs over the years, of course. I mean, Rich remembers the magazine days well. And obviously people writing about games would have been much, much, much less during that period versus when the internet exploded. So it's like you get this rise and fall. And the ones that kind of stick around are those that people find worth listening to or interesting to listen to. And I think we've seen, when you look at the people who are left, a lot of it is like this nice confluence of deep knowledge on a topic combined with the willingness to share their opinions, right? That's something we do for sure. But you look at like Jeff Gersman, for instance. He's been around just almost as long as Rich. He's still doing it. And he's established that thing. I mean, that's what Giant Bomb was originally built on back in the day, was this like we have opinions. Sometimes they're strong, but we also have a ton of knowledge about this stuff. And a lot of and that's also true with YouTubers these days. It's usually the knowledgeable YouTubers that are fun to listen to and share opinions that people kind of enjoy, whether they agree with them or not. They like to listen to it. And so when you have a large staff of writers like looking for news and writing articles, like none of that personality comes through.
Right.
And people just don't enjoy that as much anymore. And but it also means that we lose out on a lot of big story stuff and like behind the scenes features and other types of fun content. Like I look back at the old days of Eurogamer and there was just a lot of awesome stuff to read on there all the time. And it's just that stuff isn't profitable anymore. So if you're under a big company umbrella, I mean, who's going to fund that, right? So for us going independent, being able to do like say a retro podcast, we know that it has the potential to work. People have done it, but like you tell that to management, like, oh yeah, we want to talk about old games. It's like this 4 old dudes talking about old games sitting around every week. Like they're like, what are you talking about? Like, that's stupid. Don't do that. We got Fortnite over here, whatever. They don't want that. They have no interest in it at all. Even if there's a potential to make money, like it needs to be growing right now. And they don't see growth in old stuff. They don't care about a niche audience as much is the feeling I get from them. So that's just kind of my thoughts on the situation as it stands.
Alex?
Yeah, I'm just John said everything that I fully agree with. But also I just want to add in like the forever games change a little bit. The dynamic of like what news is news now. And a lot of these children to young adults, they were socialized in games like Fortnite or Roblox or Minecraft, where they have their own like little spheres of knowledge and boards and Discord groups, very dissociated, and then a lot of news that occurs in the game itself. And if you're only plugged into those ecosystems of these, very specific games and only really caring about them, you don't care about the wider industry at large and maybe about the conditions or the behind the scenes or reviews in adjacent genre. Like you just don't care about those things. So that's like an entire audience that these sites no longer have access to, and maybe we don't even have access to as independents, because it's so niche or it's so different than what we do.
Not niche,
so
that's the opposite, but like
it's the opposite.
We're the niche.
Yeah, we're the niche. But like this is like if that is where a lot of the money is going to have to go due to just demographics, then the traditional model. It makes sense that it would shed labor at that point, even if it's awful. So,
yeah. I mean, from our perspective, we're going to be launching a website. Great time to do it, right? Based on what we're seeing here. Best. But ultimately, what we want to do is to take the work that we do and get it to as many people as possible. And that means embracing different forms of media. And a website is pretty crucial to that, in my opinion. So although we're doing it on an extremely limited scale, we are actually expanding at the moment, which is really exciting.
I think so. That's something I love about you, Rich. Is like you've always had this drive to like do stuff that's cool or interesting, and that seems to like you're trying to find ways to make sure that it's like feasible, like that we're not going to like be shedding money. But you're always interested most in finding those types of things. It's like, well, this is something that people will enjoy, so we should pursue this and find a way to make it work. Right. As opposed to like, that'll make money, but not enough money. I've never heard you say that before.
Right. Okay. I mean, we do like to make money.
We love to make money. We need to survive, but like you're not driven 100% by profits.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Because that doesn't work.
I mean, when we originally sort of set up with Eurogamer, there was a shared philosophy, and it was kind of like summed up by just a simple phrase: "Wouldn't it be cool if? Would it be cool if we did this? Wouldn't it be cool if we did that?" And by experimenting, you actually find what works and what doesn't, and you refine what you do, right? So when it comes to the website, there's certain things which I think are going to happen and are happening at the moment, which is that I don't see that there's any actual point doing SEO-driven headlines or adjusting your copy to be SEO friendly. because so many people out there are doing it that you're never going to be able to beat the experts, so to speak. Nope. And secondly, AI is coming along, which is going to kill off the whole thing anyway. And so, ultimately, it's about doing good articles that people share. That's yes, kind of going old school in a way. It's stuff like, okay, we find this interesting. We've made some content about it. We're going to deploy it as a video. We're going to make a website article out of it. Maybe at some point we'll do clips or even reels. But the point is that wouldn't it be cool if that's kind of what we're embracing here.
I think you're absolutely right, Rich, and that's the big thing. Is like we found that there's an audience of people that love watching Digital Foundry that want to watch the whole videos. But there's also bits of info and things that we talk about that some people find really cool, but they don't want to watch the whole thing. But that doesn't mean they're not interested in that bit of info. And that's sort of like tapping into that whole like 30-second video clip thing, or like, small form social media posts, basically finding ways to like get stuff that's potentially cool to people out there while still producing the stuff that, is appealing to those that us old heads, I guess, that like the full thing.
Yeah, I think the other thing, of course, is that you've got, your sites like IGN and GameSpot, all of those sites, which, the scope of those sites is so huge that obviously they're far more impacted by trends within the industry. What I like to say is, we always have a bit of a downturn in the summer, but what I always like to say is that, our audience isn't actually going anywhere.
Right.
So if there's not good new games to talk about or new technologies to talk about, that's not really a problem, because the amount of stories out there doesn't actually reduce. We just pivot to doing stuff like retro, for example, and choose the right retro topic, and it's actually more valuable to us as a business than like a review of the latest AAA game that nobody will be talking about in 2 months. So, there's different ways to remain viable and interesting as a business. Ultimately, that's what it's all about, is being interesting. And at the same time, I think the other thing is that it's really difficult to build authority as a brand if you're like one of these, massive websites, because, you've got to serve everyone. So where do you become an expert in a particular thing that somebody might be interested in? Right. So I actually think that, over the course of time, and I actually think it's happening now, but especially on YouTube, is that the concept of a big entity controlling all information is falling away towards individuals or small teams that are specialists in their niches. And that's where we sit exactly, right? So, and to a certain extent, you sort of cross your fingers here, but I also think that's the approach that's going to be the most AI proof in terms of viability as a business. So, yeah, I think it's just, the thing about the games business is it's hugely dynamic. Anything can happen at any point, which is another reason why it's really difficult to do things like, okay, I'm going to like do a business plan for the next 5 years, because you just don't know what's going to be happening next month, let alone 5 years from now. So you do need that certain level of flexibility. And I do think that smaller teams can be more agile as well and can make changes more quickly. The stuff that we've got coming up since the 3 months that we went independent is stuff that, we've kind of been wanting to do for a very long time, but for various reasons we weren't able to. And yet within 3 months we were able to do it ourselves. And that's because, ultimately we're now answerable to ourselves. So, yeah, I think that's kind of like we're in this sort of transition point in the industry, and I think it will impact anybody connected to that industry, and that includes journalists. But I think that's all we've got to say about that one, unless you've got any final thoughts. No? Okay, good stuff. Now let's move on to supporter Q&A rather, which is the part of the show where every week I ask our supporters on Patreon to respond to our topics and pose their questions. We choose the best or the most appropriate, and we're going to kick off with this one from SJ33 in brackets Jake. Alex, would you do the honors?
Hi, Jake.
Jake. You just
Hi,
like
Jake.
It's that simple. Anyway, hi all. I primarily have the Xbox Ally in mind with this, but are Microsoft making a big mistake by twisting and contorting what an Xbox means? The reviews for the handheld are telling. A great handheld, stop calling it an Xbox. People have a firm conception about what a PlayStation is, what an iPhone is, and similarly, what an Xbox is. Just come clean, talk about third-party plans, their upcoming pre-built PC plans, but get the pain out of the way. Otherwise, people being gaslit about what an Xbox is will just keep festering and dragging down the brand going into the next generation. John, what is an Xbox?
Well, I learned this week that Das ist ein Xbox is also a thing, they say. Yeah, Das ist eine Xbox can be found in Germany. The thing is, though, is when I saw that sign, I was at a Media Markt here in Germany, and it turns out that there was only Switch and PlayStation stuff available.
Wow.
There was a section that had little cards hung on the wall, and I saw some controllers. But I couldn't find anything that was an Xbox outside of maybe some handhelds.
Right.
So they had the sign there, but I was unable to determine what an Xbox was from that sign. So no, but I don't know, man. It's interesting what they're doing, but I think this messaging really just comes down to what they're clearly pivoting towards, right? Like the Xbox that we knew is going away for all intents and purposes, as far as we know, right? So they've got to get people kind of used to this mindset that, you know, they are publishing games on across platforms now. You can play Xbox games in many different places, but I think they do this is an Xbox thing, is to also suggest like, hey, we actually have our service is what Xbox is. You can play our games on here. You can use the service here. You know, we have all these different ways to access Xbox content. And, you know, this is a way to sort of communicate that. Like, how else do you communicate it beyond something like this, right? Like, they needed to do something marketing wise to explain why Forza's suddenly on a PlayStation, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
You can't just like start dropping at stuff without answering it somehow. And I think this is what they've come up with, and it kind of slots in with where they're trying to go, which is to make Windows like the de facto basis of what Xbox is.
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. Alex, would you go along with that? Just what is an Xbox at this point?
Well, I think it is still, the Xbox is still what the original Xbox was. And I think Microsoft is kind of like Jake says here, trying to do this transition period where they don't piss everyone off immediately by saying we're leaving and our Xbox isn't actually an Xbox, like, you know. That's why they had that like weird video with like AMD where they're like, yeah, we're working on multiple products that support backwards compatibility. I don't think they would they have made that video going to the Series X? I think they would have been hyping about like Mike Cerny is hyping the hardware capabilities already. But instead they're talking about transitional features of backwards compatibility and those things, which I think is a bit more telling. And I do agree with Jake. I actually feel like maybe a bit of honesty would help, because as John said earlier, it wasn't just those 4 titles, was it? So yeah, we're back at that square one again with that joke. But yeah, I think I would like to have seen them or see them say, hey, our next Xbox is actually really different, and this is why it's better.
Actually, that's a great point, Alex. I think you're right. Like, to get over this hump that they're in, they need to cut ties with the old marketing, with their old strategies, the old way of doing things, and stop pretending that things are just the way they are, or like that everything's fine, right? It's time to like address people head on in a more honest way. I don't think they're ready to do it, though. That's the thing. But I think that's going to be necessary to like lay out what the new vision is, and also make it clear that they understand like why things ended up this way, or the changes that were made. Like, really try to address people properly and be honest about it. Because when you're trying to blow smoke up people's, you know, rear, and every company's been been guilty of this, it doesn't usually go all that well, does it?
Right. Okay. I'm not quite sure what to make of that.
Take it as you want, Rich. Take it as you want.
I just think maybe there's some sort of easy way to actually partially rebrand, which doesn't actually make people think they're being gaslit. I mean, I was thinking about this the other day, and it was basically if you know, the Xbox Ally X was basically branded as an Xbox Play Anywhere machine, then that kind of just makes sense, right? Because it doesn't support every single Xbox game, but it does support all of the Xbox Play Anywhere games. That's kind of like the differentiation, really. That's what makes it an Xbox, because you can go into that ecosystem, and you can play your title on an Xbox, and you can play it on a PC. And this is a PC; it's an Xbox Play Anywhere PC. That kind of made sense to me.
So this is interesting, Rich. It just occurred to me as I'm looking at the Steam Deck sitting here on my desk. It's like, wait, Valve successfully launched the Steam Deck, which is a device that runs Steam that does not play all Steam games.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's funny.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you think about it, like, just trying to connect some dots here about where Microsoft could
similar.
go.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, yeah. I mean, that's just my take on it. It's just there is still this there is still delineation between the Xbox console and other devices that run Xbox games, and they're not quite the same. And I think the disconnect here is that you've got this marketing that is basically at odds with that very basic reality, right? I think that's the issue there.
Exactly.
And I don't think it's insurmountable. I don't, obviously Xbox Play Anywhere could also stand as a brand on its own, but Xbox World, I don't know, whatever. But just something that actually is a subtle delineation that does actually let everybody know what is actually going on and what they can expect from the device. But ultimately, the Xbox Ally X it's really difficult to think of it as an Xbox, when Jake is quite right. It's a great handheld.
It's a ROG.
It's a ROG, yes. But it's a great handheld, but it's not quite an Xbox. Microsoft are making strides to try and make it one, and addressing issues like shader compilation with advanced shader delivery. That's all really, really good stuff. But ultimately, you turn it on, you're getting the Windows onboarding experience. You take the machine out of sleep, you're getting the Windows screen that pops up when you come out of sleep on a desktop or a laptop. It doesn't scream Xbox, does it? It screams PC, it screams Windows. They've got to do a much tighter job of integrating that. And I think, when Sarah Bond's, again, talking about curated experiences, I think that is the route forward. And I don't think it's actually anything sort of crazy or wacky or outlandish to actually suggest, It's just, it shouldn't, an Xbox should present as an Xbox, not as a Windows PC. And you've got to make it far more graceful if you want to sort of hybridize into both of those things. Let's move on to the next question. This one from some guy person. Bloomberg is reporting that Microsoft suddenly went from no particular margin target for the Xbox division to a 30% margin target. Industry average is 17 to 22%. Xbox was at 12%. Do you think this is the core reason for all the bad news coming from Xbox? It's probably why they're going with an extremely expensive console next generation, and why their current consoles are completely overpriced. I haven't read that report, but those are the headline figures that I have been seeing reported around. I think it's really difficult to make sweeping generalizations about a topic where you're not fully informed about the way it's all working. But with that said, the sort of perception and the direction of travel that we're seeing here with Microsoft, it does seem to be a sort of procession of necessary changes to the business, because console clearly wasn't working for them. But at the same time, there do seem to be demands being made that are resulting in some pretty crazy decisions being made, like, the cancellation of games that are quite far along in development, for example, laying off a huge bunch of really talented developers, that sort of thing, increasing the cost of the Xbox to basically, it just basically disincentivizes people to actually buy one. It's kind of baffling. John, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, looking at this, one has to potentially theorize that we're looking at what's sort of like an internal struggle between two different, groups within Microsoft. And it feels like management is essentially basically placing what feels like an unreasonable goal potentially on the Xbox team. As a result, it's like a way to essentially say, like, to enact major changes, right? Setting them up to fail so they can get what they want is what it feels like. But we don't know exactly what is actually going on, but like, it does if these numbers are to be taken and, you start to extrapolate from that, it does make one think that some of the decisions being made are basically things that the core Xbox team staff probably wouldn't have wanted to do if they had been able to continue with the way that they wanted. Not to say that things were always working the way that they could have, but this just feels like okay, let's just rip off the Band-Aid and get this over with, and then we'll go from there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it feels very much like a from the top down sort of decision about a business division that, the top management of Microsoft perhaps views as not that important anymore, at least to them. Or they want, there's obviously an importance there given how much they've invested in it, but like, it feels like they want to drastically alter what that business is to suit whatever their goals are.
Mm-hmm. I don't quite believe this concept that it never had a particular margin target, because for a business of that size, answerable to its shareholders, I kind of think it probably would have.
Of course.
Alex, thoughts?
Yeah, I guess another thing to always just remember here is that they did buy Activision Blizzard, and since they are liable to shareholders, and these people always, after some sort of acquisition, there's always some drive for like profitability, like extreme, and that's just the way this market and these systems work. And so that they would go into overdrive profitability afterward, instead of saying like, actually, this was an investment that'll, over the course of 10 years, we'll be the richest people on earth. No, it's like now. And so it kind of does horribly make sense that this could be what is being reported on.
Alex, I'm wondering, I mean, for both of you, do you think if they had not acquired Activision, that things would have been continuing as they were? Or do you think that was actually a turning point in the way Xbox is run? Or do you think that this is an inevitable transition?
Well, I mean, I think the AI pivot of Microsoft would have occurred regardless of Activision Blizzard, which is maybe now more deciding the future of Microsoft's whims than that. But at the time, man, if it didn't happen, though, they'd be in a very different marketplace, because they would have revenue that is just the same as it's ever been before, but decreasing over time because there's less Xbox users.
I think the pivot would have happened anyway, certainly towards multi-platform, because, Xbox Series consoles didn't make the impact that was hoped for. The gambit with a lower price machine with Series S apparently didn't play out or work out the way Microsoft expected. So, obviously there does need to be a change to strategy, right? I don't particularly have a problem with the multi-platform strategy at all, to be honest, but it does fundamentally change the nature of the business from this kind of, the traditional console platform holder into kind of like a hybrid of that and something like Electronic Arts at its peak. That's the way I kind of see it.
It just kind of, it creates this weird issue for me, though, where like it seems like they were moving towards this Game Pass model being like the big thing for them. But then if they shift away the businesses run, multi-platform, everything's an Xbox, it kind of potentially reduces the number of platforms where Game Pass is even a thing.
Well, that's the other thing, right? There are going to be platforms that are an Xbox allegedly, but don't run Game Pass.
Right.
So, how does that work? We go back to that disconnect between what is an Xbox and what is a client device that's actually got running ports effectively. Which
is why I feel like this was a big left turn for them, where they clearly were like going in this one direction very hard, and then somebody made the decision like, we need to like change things and go in this other direction now, because the two don't really sit that well together.
Not as much, no.
Okay. A lot of conjecture there, obviously, because we don't know
all conjecture, right? Yes.
Allegedly.
Just discussion, but it's interesting to talk about.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. This one from Jordan Spano, sorry. Hey, DF Crew, I wanted to ask what your feelings were on the state of the art in gaming. As your remit is to cover the bleeding edge, do you feel that that sentiment is anachronistic in a time where soaring dev costs and studio consolidations have put more and more emphasis on games being in as many places and appealing to as broadly as possible? Thanks for the work and congrats on making the jump to independence. I think it's kind of like, isn't one the result of the other? The reason that games are having to appear on so many different platforms at this point is because they are so expensive to make. What impact does that have on the state of the art then, John?
Well, I mean, there's still gonna that's tricky though. But when you look at what we've covered, it's always been about it's not everything always about being the highest end thing available. Of course, we cover that, but we also take a lot of enjoyment from covering like interesting and difficult like accomplishments, right? Like porting stuff to lower end machines, looking at retro hardware, things that were once extremely advanced. Like it's about the past and the future, not just like, the specific moment in time. And you can talk about technology in interesting ways and without only focusing on the most expensive, crazy things, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I enjoy looking at games from like, here's what was accomplished with this size of team or this size of budget or like at a certain scale. Appreciating what developers come up with for these titles, I think is cool. I've looked at plenty of indie titles that sort of fit that bill or smaller scale things. Like what state of the art, that can extend to many different areas. So I don't know. But I get the concern though that like there is this thing. What they're basically talking about is AAA games, and AAA is often synonymous with state of the art, but it doesn't have to be, right? And I think that's the key.
I think Battlefield 6 is a good example of that. It's a hugely successful game. It is AAA, but it's not state of the art,
right?
In terms of its rendering features. A point that Alex made in his Battlefield 6, and indeed Oliver in his Battlefield 6 review. What do you make of this one then?
I mean, it's kind of inevitable, and I don't think it's a bad thing that games are made for more devices at all, and I don't think it's going to change our remit at all. I think there's still a great enough diversity in the industry to allow for both high-end and low-end experiences. There's enough gamers to allow that markets to exist. I mean, in the past, even when in the worst times of like the mid to late 2000s in PC land, when things were not so great, you still had at least like random titles occasionally that were like, hey, this title uses a bunch of hacked on physics effects, or we made a DX10 version that is totally crazy for no good reason. You still could find those things back then. And I think even in the future, we're going to still be seeing those kind of things. Just, I mean, I hope at least. But the AAA space, I think, is in a worrisome position at the moment. And I think the next gen coming around is exciting for us because we like technology. But I'm a little worried about if there's going to be too many SKUs, too many consoles at some point in time, and we're going to have like, all these versions and God, we're spending so much money making sure this version isn't crap, and like just too much. So I think it's going to be very strange, interesting next 3 to 4 years.
Let's move on. This question from Cotton Bird. How can Sony make their new portable more successful than the Vita? Wouldn't it have had the same problem? That developing state-of-the-art graphics is expensive? How can they keep a handheld and a PlayStation 6 properly stocked? Even Nintendo, who won the portable front of every console generation they've been in by a huge margin, decided that they can't do both. I think that's a fairly good question, but I think it's fairly easily answered by the fact that I guess it's basically the Switch model expanded out into properly separate devices, same architectural building blocks, same development environment, probably much the same assets. And, they're basically scaling in a way that we're kind of getting a slight preview of with the power saver mode, and indeed with Pro support, where you actually have these sort of firm device types that address a certain performance level. So I think the difference is that with Vita, I don't think there was an easy route to producing a port of your PlayStation 3 game, although we did see some. But I think it's much easier this time around. So in effect, it is a sort of hybrid solution like Switch 2. It's just across multiple devices rather than two profiles within a single device. What do you think there, John?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Like, they're not going to. I don't believe they want to release another handheld that is its own unique platform. It's a system that's meant to live within the current PlayStation ecosystem, right? I think that's what they are going for here. I think that's the only thing they can go for, because, as they say, doing a dedicated handheld with its own library, it's not going to work. There's just no way. The resources needed to keep that running, not possible these days. It doesn't make sense. But what they are suggesting instead is essentially almost like building on the success of the PlayStation Portal in a way, where
Right.
that thing was a gigantic surprise runaway success for Sony in a way that I don't even think they saw coming. And if they can actually make a proper handheld that can play these games, one that you can take with you anywhere, similar to the Switch, I actually think there's quite a big audience for that. But because it's just an accessory as opposed to a dedicated platform, it doesn't necessarily need to represent any sort of like new paradigm or like specific platform. They can sell what they can sell, which is also different from PSVR 2, which, even though that was an accessory, still required its own unique games to be used. And that's the whole idea here, is that that won't be the case. So even if you buy this and let's say it comes out, it does what we think it's going to do, but it ends up failing, the device would still be useful, I think. You know what I mean? Like, that's the whole idea, is that it doesn't necessarily need to rely on the success of itself to be a compelling or usable device, because it shouldn't have its own library.
I think from my perspective, the question is the extendability into the next generation, because it's obviously, I think there are going to be reductions needed to make the PlayStation 5 versions running on that handheld. So what about the PlayStation 6 versions? How scalable would those be? What do you think, Alex?
I mean, eminently more scalable. I've said in the past that, and you've said it just like last week, like the longest cross-gen period ever, like basically until like maybe PS6, PS5 is still around, right into like the beginnings of PS7 or whatever that is, if there's a PS7. So I think titles that are going to be made from now to then are going to be using very similar assets across the board and will be much more scalable, especially with this, we're getting a nice die shrink, new RDNA, new Zen handheld from the Sony device here, potentially. I think it'll be really nice and powerful, actually. And I think things will scale gracefully to it, barring a couple of examples. We'll still have to see how Unreal is on a device like that. It's still troublesome on most handhelds. But yeah, I think there's going to just be a lot more scalability, and games are just going to be made for that, as they're already making them that way for PC anyway, like very scalable.
Question here from Tagon86. I'm getting worried about the future of console gaming when I see the rumored specs for PS6 and the next Xbox. They look very, very expensive to make, and Microsoft may not even subsidize their next console. TSMC 2nm and 3nm is much more expensive than 6nm. I would be surprised if PS6 ended up cheaper than the PS5 Pro. How will AAA game studios survive if we see a similar console customer base next gen? That's a pretty good question, because I do think the next consoles are going to be more expensive. I think Microsoft is basically now laying the groundwork with that recent Mashable interview with Sarah Bond. And on the Sony side, I do think they're going to be looking at a more affordable console-like device. But at the same time, the PlayStation 5 Professional is quite expensive with a relatively small 4nm die. So I do think that's going to be quite pricey as well. I think the thing which stands out to me, a couple of things, first of all, is that for decades, in terms of progression on electronics, you've kind of had a performance bump and cheaper processors, right? But I think it's more to the point that you've got to pay for more performance at this point, and the cost savings take a long, long time to actually come. So that, plus the fact that that's also countered the effects of inflation as well, which I don't think can be done now because inflation has been so huge post-COVID. It is going to end up being more expensive. But I think at the same time, people value gaming as a pastime perhaps more than they did in previous decades, and are willing to pay more for that habit. And you kind of see that in PC. PC has got a lot more expensive, and yet graphics cards, CPUs, all of those components are still shifting in huge volumes. John, what do you think?
I do think that we are going to be looking at an increase in price on all of this, but fundamentally, I think we're just at this point, and this is what I don't understand about a potential PlayStation 6 is like, how do you even pitch a next gen console at this point? Because of because the hardware is no longer really the big limiting factor in terms of game creation, right? Like new hardware that's more advanced is being created all the time, but like developers can't keep up with this. Games just take too long to make. And so like Rich has said many times, it will probably be the longest cross-gen we've ever seen. And I almost have to wonder when the cross-gen will end, because at what point will games actually release that couldn't possibly be scaled back to lower end hardware even occur?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? Like something needs to change into how these games are made, because they're just taking so long to get through now. It's really changed the nature of what consoles are. Like we've not been here before, where it's like, oh, every game is now 5 to 7 years for these big titles. That is a full console generation now.
Yeah.
It's nuts. So like, let's say you launch a game early on the system, and then by the time your next one comes out, maybe the next system's out. I don't know. It just creates this problem with selling these things to people, like having people trust in the systems they already own. I don't know, man. It's something I've been thinking about a lot, and I don't really have any answers on it yet. It's just, I really don't see how you can say like, here's the PlayStation 6, it does all this, but like, how do you meaningfully differentiate that from what we have? I'll be curious to see what they come up with, and how can you do it in a way that's actually like financially feasible for developers and consumers alike.
I don't know, Alex, the Microsoft solution is basically to become a PC effectively.
Yeah, which remains to be seen how good that product is, and how if it transitions those people from the one market segment to the other. I'm all doubting that, as I said earlier, at the moment, in spite of it looking interesting. Like John, though, I'm wondering, like, how do you like excite people for a PS6? And somehow you have to create like because if it's the cross-gen so long, games are going to be coming out on both devices simultaneously, the PlayStation 5, the PS5 Pro, and the PlayStation 6.
And the handheld. And
you're going to have to somehow excite them specifically to transition from potentially a PS5 to a PS6. And, if the same game is coming out for so long, and you already have limits on fidelity based on game development, I mean, you say like, oh, this is now the path traced game version of it. I find that compelling as a PC user, but I don't know if random person goes, oh yeah, the lighting's better. Like I don't know what they do. I get excited about that stuff, but I don't know if some other person does. And I think it is a much tougher sell. We also had a very similar discussion when PS5 Pro was launching, where before PSSR was part of the discussion, we were always kind of like, oh, if it's only marginally more powerful, what is the interest in this device going to be about? So we're going to probably end up having more of this conversation in the future until Sony gives us more information. But I think that is actually a really cool talking point.
Okay, going to move on now. Not so much a question, more kind of just sort of like a stream of consciousness from one particular supporter. So let's just crack on. Did you ever hear the tragedy of Alex Battaglia the Wise? I thought not. This is not a story most publishers would tell you. Alex Battaglia was a lord of optimization, so powerful and so wise he could use his knowledge to prevent stutter. He had such a mastery of graphic settings that he could even keep frame time smooth without hitching. He became so powerful that the only thing he feared was the lack of shader pre-compilation, which of course plagued every Unreal Engine game he tested. He taught the developers everything he knew, but Unreal Engine and DirectX 12 betrayed him. It's ironic. He could save others from the stutter struggle, but not himself. But he wasn't finished there, because he cropped up a couple of hours later with this one. If stutter struggle were ever truly defeated and a new age of PC gaming began, what would make Alex Battaglia the patron saint of smooth frame times? Or would he ascend to some higher plane beyond frame time graphs entirely? All of that from Leftist Hominid.
Wow.
Man, Alex, where
That's
do you go?
great. I mean, I get what they're saying, because it's formed such a huge part of PC reviews from me for, it feels like so long, too long, that, like, what would I do? Like, what would I talk about? Well, hopefully at that point in time, I'd talk about more, like recently, I just did a video on the Outer Worlds 2, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I spent a lot of time talking about, like, basic stuff, that you really wish I wasn't talking about anymore. But as soon as I didn't do that, maybe I could talk about, like, the graphical techniques and how it affects the art design and all these things that actually, if you go back in time and look at stuff before I started talking about stutter struggle a lot, I did throw a lot more of that in videos than I do now. But with, like, the port release, schedule, I, like, want to make sure I get out, like, the stutter information, the optimized settings information, and I actually do dial back a bit on talking about the tech sometimes, because it's such a big issue. But I hope if it does go away, there's probably going to be some other thing on the road to smoothness that we can then start concentrating on, like mouse smoothness and general frame time smoothness. We talked about the Steve Gamer's Nexus stuff last week. Just general smoothness beyond shader comp.
And input latency as well, which was something
for sure.
you were talking about with the Outer Worlds with VSync on.
Yeah, I didn't mention in the video, but the Outer Worlds with VSync has 60 hertz VSync has 120 milliseconds of PCL. That is huge. That is, I mean, it's not the same, but we're like a little more than halfway there to Killzone 2 PS3 30 FPS.
And Kinect.
But this is a modern game and connects. Yeah. Like I really wonder why that is the case. Most people aren't going to be playing with VSync, but everyone on console is.
I did note actually that Oliver pointed out that the controls are a bit muggy. Now, I did wonder whether it's the same phenomena, because you capped at 60 and turned off VSync and it went down to like 50 milliseconds.
Oh, yeah. It was way better without VSync on. I wonder if this game is just doing a lot of crazy frame queuing to help things out, smoothness-wise, when you have VSync on, which would be sensible if the game wasn't, a very input latency sensitive game, but it has its limits, and I felt it super hardcore on a mouse at 60 hertz. But that wasn't in my review. Whatever.
I guess if we were attempting to bring some level of serious discussion to this crazy outburst here, ascending beyond to some higher plane beyond frame time graphs entirely, I guess it would be like a locked 1 millisecond frame time for everything.
Oh yeah,
like 1,000 hertz monitors, locked one millisecond frame time, start to finish. That'd be the way forward.
I recently loaded up Fear on its anniversary using the Echo patch, and you can play that. It's still actually a little bit CPU limited, but you can play that like north of 180 FPS pretty much the entire time. And man, games at that level of input latency and smoothness, they're so good.
Pretty good.
So good.
I hesitate to ask, John, but do you have any comment on this particular outburst?
No. Okay. Instead, I have breaking news.
Right.
According to GTA 6 latest, GTA 6 will, and I quote, have drivable cars.
Really?
Oh man.
So,
oh jeez.
You heard it here second.
Hashtag game changer. Wow.
My head exploded.
On that note,
I can sleep easy at night now, knowing
it's there. Don't worry, guys.
Drivable
cars are in.
Okay, and with that, I think we should wrap up. Please do like, subscribe, share on the off chance you enjoyed this particular episode of DF Direct Weekly. But really, it's all about the DF supporter program. Patreon.com/Digital Foundry. investigate our supporter program there. Store.digitalfoundry.net if you would like to wear clothes or access sundry other items that have our branding on them. But that's all for us for this week. Thanks for watching and supporting Digital Foundry. And with a crushing inevitability, we will be back next week. But that's all for now. See ya.